Welcome to NC3T's Brown Bag Webinar Series. This is Hans Meeder from the National Center for College and Career Transitions, and I will be the facilitator for today's session. Today's webinar is entitled The Importance of Brand Strategy, Building Your Pathways Communication Plan. NC3T is a mission-driven organization focused on helping states, school districts, post-secondary education providers, and workforce partners develop college and career pathway systems. We provide technical assistance, coaching, and consulting services. A few of our resources that we have available, the first two can be purchased through NC3T's website under our Resources tab. The Employer Engagement Toolkit, which is practical advice for educators on how to establish and maintain effective business and industry partnerships, and the STEM Leaders Guide, which is how to build a STEM program and a STEM culture in your school. Our newest book, The Power and Promise of Pathways, is due to be published this fall, and we will be offering pre-orders for that book very soon. So let me talk about today's topic. As we begin the topic, we'll take a moment and remind our viewers about the Pathway System Framework. Here you see 5 components. The cross-sector partnerships is where we'll be focusing mostly today, which is creating sustained collaboration among multiple stakeholders who work together to build a local pathway system. Second is well-organized career exploration and planning activities, helping learners make informed choices about careers and related education and training. Under pathway programs of study, the theme is multiple pathway programs of study at the secondary, adult, and post-secondary education levels that are aligned with learner interest and workforce demands. Dynamic teaching and learning focuses on engaging learners in rigorous and active learning techniques using research-proven instructional practices. And finally, employer and community engagement, offering learners work and learn experiences, employer-mentor relationships, and support as they complete a program of study and transition into further education and employment. So today we'll focus on cross-sector partnerships, but the communications theme can also focus on another one as well. But with cross-sector partnerships, if you're building a broad pathway system, you'll definitely need to create a coordinated communications plan and branding that will cut across all of your cross-sector partners so that everyone is communicating from a consistent message. And even if you're just focused on component 3, building an individual pathway program of study, you will certainly need effective communication strategy. So now I want to introduce our presenter today, Pamela Daley, with DK Brand Strategy. Pam brings over 30 years of national brand marketing expertise to DK Brand Strategy, which is an Ohio-based brand strategy consultancy that she founded in 2001. Pam has worked with some of America's best known and most successful brands, Coca-Cola, Wendy's, Ford, Golden Corral, Gibson Guitar, Educational Services of America, and many more. But her organization also assists nonprofits in establishing strong brands while increasing their prestige and sustaining revenue. Some of those include the Boys and Girls Club, the United Methodist Church, the Nashville Opera, the Nashville Zoo, Adventure Science Center, Gilda's Club, and others. In 2009, Pam began a specialization in education with the nationally recognized Academies of Nashville Branding Initiative. And that is the context in which Pam and I first met. She works to help position career academies as the most effective education reform in the country and works with the Metro Nashville Public Schools, National Career Academy Coalition, Ford Next Generation Learning, and Philadelphia Academies, Inc. And if there is an award out there, Pam and DK Brand Strategy has probably won it. I won't read off all of those awards right now. But she is recognized as a national expert and asked to speak at multiple national conferences about the process of building a strong brand. Further, Pam has graciously authored a chapter in my forthcoming book, The Power and Promise of Pathways. So you'll be getting a sneak peek at what is in that chapter. So I want to thank Pam in advance for that work she's done. So with that, I would like to turn it over to you, Pam, and thank you again for joining us today and sharing with us your insights.
Thank you, Hans. I also want to thank Candace, who is Hans' behind-the-scenes superhero, who has been very patient in getting me ready for this webinar today. And I'm really thankful for all of you. I'm so excited to know that, you like to talk about brand strategy as much as I do. So let's just get right in because we've got a lot of things to cover. And I'm excited to take your questions at the end. So, branding, marketing, and communications, especially in the education sector, has become a hot topic in the last couple of years. I accidentally became personally involved about 6 years ago. I was living in Nashville, and I was part of a group of business leaders who were really concerned about our failing public school system. We were facing state takeover, and we're in really a dire situation. We became convinced that we needed reform, and reform by way of career-connected education. And so we scoured the country for somebody that could help us with this reform initiative, and basically went to Florida and stole Jay Steele away from them, brought him to Nashville and charged him with implementing a career academy platform in all of our comprehensive high schools. Basically, Nashville went wall-to-wall career academies in about 18 months, which is a fairly large endeavor. Jay himself is really an astute marketer, which is, I found, unusual in the education setting. And he realized that an initiative this big would lend itself to confusion, both internally within our own, within our teachers and our frontline staff and our admin. Also externally, there was a lot of, obviously we're facing very negative perceptions about our school system. There was a lot of mistrust. This is just another reform initiative. They're not going to do this any better than they did the last 12 they tried. And frankly, there was still misconceptions about what career-connected education really is. We were still facing that career-connected education is vo-tech education. I don't know how many of you face that same issue, but we found that that was still something that we needed to focus on overcoming. And so Jay actually, decided we need to do something that was strategic and purposeful as it related to communicating what this reform was about and how we felt it would really help student outcomes. And he asked me if there was a way we might be able to apply brand strategy in the education sector to help overcome some of these issues. And frankly, I didn't know. I had never worked in the education sector before. I can tell you the first year that I was around educators, I didn't understand anything they were saying because everything was an acronym, and so it was really learning how to communicate in a different way. And so we tried it. I have a platform that I've been using for about 20 years called Brand Track, and it's the same exact process that I take all my Fortune 500 clients through, that has a beginning and a middle and an end, and it's a process for determining and delivering strong brand strategy. And what we found is that it worked, and it was very successful. And over the last 4 or 5 years, there have been many other urban districts who have come to Nashville, seen what we're doing, and implemented the exact same brand strategy in their own markets. What I hope to do today is give you the basics of that process, provide to you maybe a clear understanding of the impact of brand and brand strategy as it relates to career-connected education. I want to give you some real-life examples of some things that have been done in other districts, and then also provide you with tools that you can take away and use immediately in your own districts. So let's just get started. I know that you know why you should care because you're here, but I still hear a lot of, why should I care about brand strategy? I've got a gazillion things to do. And, marketing and communications is not something that I feel my district needs to focus on. And what I typically say is, well, there's 4 reasons you need to care about this: engagement, ownership, leverage, and recruitment. Consumers and constituents, and we're going to talk about the definition of a consumer and a constituent in a moment, but consumers and constituents can't support you if they don't know what you're doing. And it's really as simple as that. And if you can engage your parents, your students, your business partners, then you can provide a sustainable platform over time because they're going to support what you're doing. You have to communicate the good news that's happening with career-connected education, and I personally believe that that is the most effective way to help improve student outcomes. Ownership. Ownership is extremely important, both student ownership and teacher ownership. One of the things that we found out when we were implementing career academies in Nashville is that many of our teachers really didn't understand the reform and the movement, and we really needed to focus almost a year on educating ourselves. And once we did that, we found that, you know, the ownership both by the students who are in the pathway programs and the teachers themselves, it made a tremendous difference for us. Defining good brand strategy and talking about yourself is positive and leverageable. We have in the urban districts I work with are feeling a competitive environment. Urban education is in a competitive environment now. And we're seeing a lot of flight to private and charters. And in order to be able to combat that flight, we need to be able to prove that what we're doing is working. And you can't do that without a good marketing and communications plan. And then finally, recruitment. Teachers want to work for districts that are doing good things. And by providing that information and evidence of success, you're going to find that teachers are going to want to come and work for you. And so those are the 4 things that I like to focus on when talking to especially leadership in districts about why this is important. This, to me, engagement is the most important thing. Engagement leads to understanding and support and will contribute to your ability to stay in your program over time. And we've seen evidence of that in several urban districts, and I'll share that with you today. And I'm sure by now you're saying, like, seriously, I don't even know where to start. I don't even understand what this means. And so what we're going to try to do today is just give you enough to make you scary efficient in your own backyard. And I also want to say that any of the things that I am discussing today are free for you to steal and utilize in your own environment. And we really encourage you to, if you see something that you like and a good idea, please steal it and do it in your own backyard. We want to start just quickly with an understanding of the difference between brand and branding. You already have a brand. What a brand really is the sum of the perceptions that your customers hold about you. And you have limited control of what that is. If you are in a district where you've had some little performing issues, you already have people that probably think things about you, whether they're right or whether they're wrong. As an example of perception, we're working with an urban district in the middle school environment, which, of course, we're seeing a ton of flight. People are happy to send their kids to elementary school, but when it gets to the middle school, they don't want to go there. So what we found out is that 90% of the people that we polled had a negative perception that the middle schools were not rigorous and were unsafe. But of those 90%, 80% of them have never stepped foot in a middle school. So sometimes perceptions are just wrong. And without communicating and without being able to build strategy against communicating, you can't change those perceptions. The most important thing about your brand is the emotional feeling. People respond emotionally to almost everything, and that is the most important thing that you can capitalize on, is the emotional benefit of what you're providing to your students. And we're going to talk a little bit about that later and show you how you can use that in an actual communications campaign. Branding is really the stuff that you do internally and externally to help shift perception. And so the difference between brand and branding is that brand already exists. People already have a feeling about what you're doing. Branding is the activities that you undertake and the strategy you use for those tactical implementations to try to change that perspective. You want to get people to either think differently or do something differently, and that's really what branding is. Dwayne Knapp is a really great author. He's written a book called The Brand Mindset. If anybody really wants to delve a little deeper into that, I would recommend that you get this book and give it a read. But I want to kind of condense this book into one slide for you and talk to you about really what brand means as far as providing distinction between you and your competitors. If you're on the left side of this continuum, you're a commodity. And commodities are basically differentiated on price. An example of a commodity might be a bank. And I have some banking clients, and they don't like to hear that. But as a consumer, when you're deciding about which bank to use, typically, unless you have a relationship with someone, you're going to choose a bank that either offers you the lowest rate on a mortgage or the highest interest on a checking account. So really, you're making decisions based on price. There are a lot of things out there that are recognizable brands that spend millions of dollars behind their branding, but they don't do a good job of differentiating the difference between them. And I always use MetLife and Allstate as an example. Unless you're in this business or maybe have a brother-in-law that's in this business, you might not know what the difference between their products and services are. I mean, most people know Snoopy and Good Hands people, but honestly, they can't tell you what the difference between those two brands are. So just because you spend a lot of money against a branding effort doesn't mean you're doing a good job of communicating what your benefit is. The other thing you really need to remember about brands is that they are very personal. Brands have two things. Real brands have two things. They have functional benefits and they have emotional benefits, and that's going to play a really important part in determining your brand strategy. For me personally, I'm on the road every week, and one of the brands that I use continually is Marriott. And Marriott functionally has, good beds, they're safe, they're convenient. Those are all functional benefits. But for me, from an emotional standpoint, long time ago, many years ago, I was staying at a courtyard, and the staff there had gotten to know me because I was in town so much, and they noticed I had been in my room for about 12 hours and hadn't poked my head out. And there was a knock on my door, and the manager came up and brought me some food. And he said, we noticed you haven't been out, and you need to eat and keep your energy up. And I never forgot that. And that emotional connection that I had between, really being so thankful that they thought about me has affected my purchase decisions. I will not go to a Sheraton. I'm a Marriott girl through and through. And that emotional connection with the brand really is what made a difference for me. There are some brands that are so connected emotionally that it doesn't matter what happens to price. It doesn't matter if you're giving away the competitive product for free. You are never going to choose another brand. And a really great example of that is Coke. If you're a Coke drinker, it doesn't matter if they're giving Pepsi away for free, you're going to drink Coke. And for you might think of Apple or maybe a favorite car brand that you have that you're just very loyal. And that loyalty is really connected to the emotional benefit of the brand. And so as we think about branding in an education environment, you can't get more emotional than talking about the success of your kid and your students. And so that is where we're going to focus on differentiating ourselves as we move forward. Okay, some of you are probably saying, blah, blah, blah. I still have no idea what she is talking about. So I'm going to try to clarify this by saying, really, the more branded the product or service, the more perceived value you have, and the more loyal your customer is going to be. And for school districts, that sustainability really relates to recruitment and sustained recruitment. And the value portion of this is your ability to change perception about what you're delivering day in and day out at the student level. One thing I always say that you need to remember is that it's all about them and it's not about you. Good brand strategy is about speaking from your consumer's point of view, not the district's point of view. And frankly, large districts, small districts, it doesn't really matter, their communications departments don't do a very good job of communicating. And that's not their fault. They were never set up to do marketing and branding. They were really set up to, crisis management or just to simply, communicate when school starts, when it ends, bus routes, those kind of things. So making the shift between that kind of communication and communicating from your customer's point of view is sometimes a hard one. And it's one that we have to continually check ourselves against. And so you say, okay, well, who's them? Who's them are your customers and your constituents, and there is a difference. A customer is someone who actually utilizes your brand. So a customer would be perhaps a student, a parent, even a teacher. A constituent would be someone who has an opinion about your brand. We have media that have opinions about our brand, politicians. So there's a huge list of consumers and constituents that you need to think about when starting your trek into brand strategy. We're going to focus on 4 today, the 4 most important in my opinion. And I'm happy to discuss all the other constituents and plans against those at any time with anyone. So you can just give me a buzz on that. Okay, obviously teachers. It's very important that our teachers understand fundamentally what our brand is and the value we're providing to our end users. Students, parents, and the business community. And honestly, the community at large is really important. And we're going to talk about specific tactics to use to reach all four of these primary audiences. And again, it's all about perception. And, I always say this ain't your mama's CTE. There's still a lot of really interesting perceptions about what career-connected education is. And the more we can clarify that and clarify the benefit to our students, the better off we're going to be. All right, one of the most important things that you need to do is gather a team of people to help you with this. And I don't know how many of you are actually from communications departments, which I think that's awesome. I think this is actually where all of this stuff needs to lie. However, many of you are probably educators, frontline educators that are just trying to communicate about what's going on in your classroom. The brand team is one of the most important things you can do. What you want to try to do is gather a team of people that represent the different viewpoints of your consumers and your constituents. So a typical brand team would have some educators, it might have some business partners, it might have a couple students, it might have a couple parents. And what you want to do is you want to gather this team of people together and utilize that team to help you begin your brand strategy process. And this team would be together at least for a year to 18 months to help you implement your brand strategy process and probably more importantly to help garner consensus within all of these different groups, because every group has a very different point of view when it comes to your brand. You can't know where you're going or where you want to go until you know where you are. So the very first thing that I counsel people to do if they do nothing else is a SWOT analysis. And you all probably know what SWOT is. That stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And it's really important to get that perspective from all of your constituents. So before you do any planning, what you want to do is you want to ask students, you want to ask parents, you want to ask business partners or prospective business partners, you want to ask teachers, how do they think and feel and believe about what you're doing, especially as it relates to career-connected reform. Some of the things that we encountered from the community in Nashville was that this idea of schools becoming academies would make it very vo-tech oriented versus college prep, and we had a ton of pushback about that. There was also this perception that our career academy structure wasn't rigorous enough, and it was actually going to weaken the intellectual aspect of the studies that the students were engaged in. And then also there's this perception that all public schools are the same and they're, commodities, if you will, and that charters and magnets are always going to be better. So those were just some of the things that we ran into from a community standpoint. Honestly, from a teacher standpoint, there was a lot of disbelief. This was reform number 375, and I think a lot of our teachers felt like this wasn't going to be a sustainable effort, like so many other things that we had tried. So, it's really interesting to get the point of view of all your constituents before you start making decisions about what specific perceptions you want to address. Here is an example of what I call a constituent list. And what you do is you write a constituent group on the left, and then you think about what value proposition you're offering or what's in it for them, really, is what we're talking about. You also want to think about how you want them to feel and believe about what you're doing. And then you want to think about why or for what business purpose. And we won't go through this line by line, but I think this is a really great example of how to start thinking about prioritizing and listing your constituents and how you want to change their perception. And you should actually do this for every single consumer or constituent that you identify for your district. The next really important thing is the brand promise. And a brand promise is not a mission statement. A brand promise is an internal statement of external purpose. And I know that sounds like a bunch of marketing gobbledygook, and I'll explain this. But a brand promise is really the promise that you make as a district to your students, your parents, your business partners, and your community. It's not going to be a tagline either. It's basically an internal understanding of what it is you're going to deliver every day and why it's important and meaningful. Typically, even today, a lot of the companies that I work with will have a mission-based structure. So they'll get a bunch of muckety-mucks in a room, and they'll talk about what the mission of the company is. And then they might talk about what vision they have for 5 years, and then perhaps what value they might provide to their end users. That is absolutely backwards. You need to really think from the perspective of your customers. How many times have any of you gone to a website to look up a company's mission statement before you bought something from their company? Never, because we don't care about that. That's all about them. We care about what's in it for us. And so the brand promise is a statement that basically underlines what functional benefits and emotional benefits you're going to be providing to your end user. And the reason this is such a big deal is that the brand promise is a compass for your entire organization, and everything that you do, not just from a marketing and a branding standpoint, but operationally, the way you deliver things needs to be based on that brand promise. It's a clear and compelling vision. It should drive your decisions, and it really breaks down silos and helps create consensus, which is a big problem in large urban school districts. Here's an example of a bad brand promise. This is, I hope nobody works for VP on this call, but if you do, it's still a bad brand promise. This is, anytime you have to have a brand promise and then have 8 bullet points to describe it, it's probably not a good one. The fact that it's not believable in its essence is another big problem. Here's a really good brand promise. This is McDonald's brand promise, and they offer an inexpensive, familiar, and consistent meal delivered quickly in a clean environment. That's why when you go to Paris and get a Big Mac, it's the same Big Mac you can get if you go to Paris, Tennessee and get one. So those are great examples of brand promises. A brand promise really should reflect your functional and your emotional benefit to your student. The promise can be aspirational, but you have to be able to deliver on it. I had an urban district that said, we want to be the most technologically advanced urban school district in the country. And the fact of the matter was we couldn't do that. That was not something that we could attain, so it can't be in your brand promise. If you can't do it, you can't say it. I wanted to give you an example of another large urban district that I worked with, some of their functional benefits that they're delivering to their students, and also some of their emotional benefits. And these are the actual attributes that were utilized to write their brand promise. And their brand promise is, academies are a safe and trusting environment. I love belonging to a supportive community with lots of school activities and outside opportunities. Learning is relevant to the real world, and I'm challenged to meet high expectations. My voice is heard, and I can express my uniqueness. It's family. I think you can see clearly the student voice in this brand promise. And this brand promise is now how they are fundamentally beginning their communications strategy, and I'll talk a little bit about that. Okay, the important part. Now you got your brand promise, you got your brand team, and now you want to actually talk about what you are doing. You got to have a strategy. You got to have a plan. Then you got to implement your plan. And if you just do those 3 things, you'll be successful. Don't start doing things without a strategy, because if you don't have an idea of what you want to accomplish, it's going to be really hard to tell if you actually get there. So start with a strategy. If you can answer these 5 things, you're ready to begin planning, tactically planning your marketing and communications plan. What's your goal? And you should really use your brand promise as a guide here. And who are you trying to reach, and what do you want them to do? You can't talk to people without having an expectation that they're not going to do anything after learning what you're telling them about. How do you define your message? Again, that's something that you're going to use your brand promise for. How do you deliver your message? And that we'll talk a little bit about that. Should those be posters? Should those be flyers? Should those be events? Should that be professional development? Professional development can count as a tactic under brand strategy. And you want to be able to complete this sentence. We will know we are successful in this effort when this happens. And if you can answer all of those questions, then you're ready to start building your plan. I think the goal should really be conveying the true nature of career-connected education, the issues that it deals with, and student outcomes. And the other thing is that if you're not providing a benefit, you can't brand it. You have to be able to prove that you're providing a benefit to your students, to your business partners, to your teachers. Your audience should start internally. That's one thing that we've learned, is that we have to start with ourselves and our students, and then once we have them up to speed, we can start thinking about our external audiences. The message really based in the brand promise has to be from the point of view of the student. And you want to really be thinking about what do we want them to think about us? How do we want them to feel about what we're doing? And what do we want them to believe about career-connected education? There's lots of ways to deliver messages. Word of mouth is the cheapest and the easiest. And you start by building advocates for your programs. We're going to talk a little bit about the brand ambassador programs that we have implemented in all of the urban districts that I've worked with, where the students actually become ambassadors for the brand. That has been probably the single most effective delivery method that we have had. Media stories, press releases, posters, outreach presentations, special events and open houses are all things that you can utilize to get your message out there. But always remember, what is your outcome? What do we want them to do, and are they doing it? Again, it's not about you, it's about them. It's about making or communicating your outreach, and your marketing is communicating a promise and keeping your promise. And those are the two most important things we need to remember. With teachers, some of the things that we want to accomplish is empowerment, ownership. They feel like they're part of the community. Buy-in. For students, we find that these smaller learning communities really give them a sense of pride. They feel empowered. They feel cared for. They belong to a group. And again, they're our biggest assets from a word-of-mouth perspective. Parents, it's about understanding and buy-in. If they understand what you're doing and how it's helping their kid, they're going to support you. And so we have to be able to communicate clearly to them what the benefit to their kid is going to be, their career-connected education. And then obviously in the community, this is all about business engagement, economic development, investment, and actual employee recruitment from a business standpoint. So those are all things that we want to consider when putting a communications plan together towards our community and business partners. It doesn't happen overnight, but it should happen fairly quickly. This is the typical funnel that people go through when they're making a decision about whether to support what you're doing or not. The very first thing is that they have to be aware of what you're doing, and then they become comfortable with it. Then they actually start saying, well, you know what, I think that is a pretty good idea. And then you got them. A lot of people ask me, how long does it take? Well, I can tell you the first 6 months of implementing a solid brand strategy and a marketing communication plan in Nashville had some pretty significant results, and I'll talk about numbers here in a minute. I want to give you just a couple of examples from Nashville on some of the things that we did there. Our plan was really a 5-year plan. We wanted to start with our internal audience. We worked really on ourselves for about a year, and then we started engaging the student body, then parents and caregivers, then community outreach, and then we sustained that over time. So it's not as if in year 2 we stopped communicating to our internal audience. We just added it. So today we have ongoing strategy against all 4 of those audiences, and we've seen some really significant results. One of the first things that we noticed when we were implementing the program, that the people that were closest to our consumer, which was our parents and our kids, were the folks that were working in the front office at the high school. And nobody had ever talked to them about what we were doing and what career academies were and what the benefit was. And that was really silly, because they're your front line. They are the people that have the most immediate communication with anybody walking in that school building. So we developed toolkits that we delivered to each one of our frontline staff and did a lot of PD with them so they could start understanding the reform and start being a part of the reform itself. We also did brochures. We did customer service training. We found out that a lot of times when you go into one of our front offices in our high schools, it's kind of scary. So we talked about how can we make that a more friendly, open environment. We also did a lot of things with our students. The ambassador program I mentioned before, this is an opportunity where you can actually engage students, provide a leadership opportunity for them, and then the students actually become your ambassadors both inside your building and outside the building. Our ambassadors do all of our tours that happen in the building. The adults do not talk. It's all the ambassadors. They also do a lot of outreach, going to community meetings and Rotary, and they are fantastic. We also did some other things, student video awards, where we had our high school students do videos about their individual academies and what was great about them. That was great because it engaged them but also gave us content that we could use on our blog, on the website. Other examples with teachers, a lot of PD, a ton of PD. We also did, the seminars on how to talk to a business partner and not using acronyms. We also did a lot of showcases. We're in the process right now of doing the same thing in our middle schools, where we actually bring in realtors to take a look at what's going on in the school. A lot of times when people move into a community, the first person they're going to listen to about where the best school district is the person selling their house. And we realize that, and so we have a whole plan against realtors as a constituent. For the community, we really feel like some of the best tactical plans are getting people in the schools. If you can get somebody in your school and actually show them what you're doing, you're going to get them. If we could just get every single person who has a bad perception about us to come and actually visit, we would have a big win. So things like open houses, VIP events at your school, again, all hosted by your ambassadors, can be super effective. Utilize the web. It's really efficient and effective. We do student blogs that the ambassadors actually manage for each one of their schools. We have Facebook, Instagram accounts. All of those things are where your students are living and is the best way to communicate with them. Here's an example of the I Can campaign that I hope you all will steal. And basically what we did is we really tried to focus on the emotional benefits of what we were doing from a career-connected point of view. I always say puppies and kids. If you can get puppies and kids, you can get people to pay attention to your campaign. And what we did fundamentally for this campaign was capture actual student stories. For example, I can speak to thousands of people on the importance of proper waste disposal, but I still can't talk to girls. I can rebuild a front-end suspension system, and I don't have my driver's license. These are all examples of taking the emotional benefits from the student point of view and using those in an advertising campaign. So what we did is we captured student statements. We chose the ones we thought were most resonant. We selected the outlets that we thought would be most effective. In Nashville specifically, we have a very mobile urban district, and we felt outdoor advertising and bus wraps were a great avenue for us. And then we measured what we were doing. I have an actual video of the campaign that I'm going to not show because I don't think it's going to play, but we'll add to your attachments at the end so that you can watch it. But here's just an idea of how we utilize the I Can campaign in marketing and advertising. From a money standpoint, a lot of you are probably thinking, I can't afford to do any of this. We really used our business partners to help us, and what we found is that they were very amenable to help underwrite a lot of these campaigns for us for a little bit of exposure. So you'll see that here. And here's an example of some of the best reps that we did. Bench reps. We also utilized videos in cinemas and even had kids in the schools that had gas stations closest to them design ads that could be put on gas station video monitors. So I'm going really fast now because I know my time is almost up. But, last thing and one of the most important things is you have to measure what you're doing. Here's an example of how we measured our success with the campaign and the investment that we made in Nashville for the I Can campaign. You're going to be able to access this and utilize this. And we really felt we had some tremendous return. We had about, 29 million impressions at about, a 0.003 cost per impression, which is a very efficient campaign. But the bottom line for us is that we were able to halt the slide of perception. We had a survey that showed that 80% of all of our visitors to our schools reported a positive perception of the school and an understanding of what career-connected education was. The campaign was also recognized by Arnie Duncan as best in practice and ultimately resulted in President Obama coming to Nashville to McGavick High School to talk about our strategy and how that's working for our kids. We ended up with a 10-to-1 return on our campaign, and again, all this was based on sound brand strategy. So I know that was a ton of information in a very short amount of time. So I'll just say that we'll have a lot of attachments. I've got an actual SWOT survey you can use. I've got a communications planning worksheet you can use, as well as some marketing calendar templates that you all can take and use that will be provided. And I guess at this point, we'll just open it up for questions.
Thank you, Pam. That's it's hard to cram a 25-year career into 25 minutes, isn't it? So thank you very much.
Well, I didn't talk as fast as I thought I could, I guess.
We probably have time for one or two questions. I'm going to get things started. Pam, what would you say are some of the most common rookie mistakes that people might make when they're first getting into branding and communications?
The two that I would say are the most prevalent is starting without a strategy, just sort of the spaghetti approach, throwing spaghetti on a wall tactically and just saying, well, let's do a poster. You really have to start with strategy so that you know where you are, where you want to go, and how to measure it. The other thing I think really needs to be addressed is the idea of communication in language that lay people understand. You really can't use acronyms because nobody understands what you're talking about. So if you can not do those two things, I think you'll be successful.
Okay. If anyone has a question, just pop them into the question box. We have a couple here. Is there a difference in the way you approach branding for education versus the for-profit sector, or do you kind of if so, what are those differences?
You know, really there isn't, and that was, I think a surprise initially 6 years ago when we started with Nashville. Good brand strategy is a process, and if you utilize a good process, you're going to have good strategy. And so there hasn't really been, other than the communication issue between making sure that you're talking in real words. Really, that was the only thing that was any different. So I would say they're pretty much the same.
Okay, great. Here's a question. Can you describe what you mean by the 10-to-1 return?
Yeah, we actually took, I'm trying to think, I think we ended up getting about $250,000 from our business partners, which I know sounds like a lot of money. And so we invested $250,000 in the stuff, in the bus wrap, in advertising, but we received 10 times that much in reach, in consumer reach and awareness levels. So that's what 10-to-1 means. And typically, if you're going to do anything from an advertising standpoint, you want to at least be able to prove a 2.5-to-1 return. 10-to-1 is just really good.
Mm-hmm. Good. Here's an interesting question. Was that example you gave about Marriott, was it really just a nice gesture that made you feel more loyal, or did it actually have something to do with that brand feel?
For me, it was that they noticed me. So I wasn't just one of the gazillion people that come in and stay with them every day. They noticed me, and they noticed me as an individual person. And somebody was astute enough to say, hey, that person hasn't been out of a room. For me, it was that personal, making me feel like I was important, that I was singularly important. And they continued to do that for me. So, that's really what the difference was. It wasn't the cheese tray. It was making me feel special.
Okay, good. Well, time is working against us here, but this has just been phenomenal. Several people asked, and I wanted to clarify, we will be sending out a copy of the presentation as well as a link so you can watch the recorded presentation or pass that along to any of your friends and colleagues. So again, thank you so much, Pam. This was excellent. And we hope that you enjoyed today's session, and we encourage you to join us for next month's webinar. We have a really interesting webinar coming up on exploring apprenticeship programs, and that will be with guests from the Kentucky Fame Apprenticeship Program. We have a community college presenter, Dr. Diane Leverage, and then we have from Aiken County, South Carolina, the MTU Apprenticeship Program, which is a high school-based apprenticeship program. Mrs. Natalie Fox from the Technical Center there will be presenting for us. That will be on October 21st from 1 p.m. Eastern, starting at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. And you can register on the homepage of our website or in a follow-up email that we will send out to everyone. Finally, we'd like to keep on improving, so we would appreciate your feedback on today's webinar. When we finish today, there'll be a brief 7-question survey that you'll receive, and we definitely would appreciate your help in giving us some feedback. Thank you again, everyone, for attending today's webinar. Thank you, Pam. Thank you, Candace. And have a good afternoon. Take care.